of European Studies today, and the session is recorded, as you could hear. Everyone should be aware of it. I'm pleased to moderate today's discussion on parliamentary elections in Georgia. I would like to put those elections in a bigger picture and talk also a bit about political situation in Georgia at the moment. So this is also how we would start this discussion. But before we go to discussion, maybe a short intro and some technical advices. How should I start? Maybe I will start with myself, since I'm already talking. Exactly, I'm representing the NGOs today, but normally I'm working for EPDE, Democratic Platform for European Platform for Democratic Elections. So sorry. And we've been organizing a study trip together with ISFED, an Georgian NGO that is represented by Irina today. And so I am speaking today from Tbilisi. And I was really lucky to be here in this time, such an important time for Georgia. And today with me, we have three great speakers that will give you a great overview about the situation. The first one, already mentioned, Irina Mamuashvili. She is a program manager at International Society for Fair Election and Democracy, ISFED, the partner organization of the organization that I normally work for. And exactly, hello, Irina.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for organizing such an impactful event.
Yeah, thank you. And okay, then I would just also briefly introduce the other speakers. Our second speaker is Nina Vaxanski. Nina studied law, but since 2015 she works as a local producer and a photographer for international media in Georgia. Hello, Nina. I will make you say hi, so everyone had a voice.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Thank you for paying such close attention to Georgia, because this is very important to us right now. The support and exposure in the times of elections, which also can be a synonym part of Georgia's democracy at the moment. So any kind of attention and involvement is really crucial for us right now. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, the international support is also very important. That's why we are doing it. And our third speaker is Victoria Pfeilschifter, and she is a Berlin-based social scientist with a political background. She is a doctoral candidate and research associate at the Institute for Caucasus Studies at Friedrich Schiller University in Jena, and she also works as a research affiliate at the Center for Eastern European and International Studies, ZOIS. Thank you for being us today.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you also for bringing us together and for the invitation. So I'm very glad to have the chance to discuss with you all.
Yeah, okay, perfect. We have the speakers. Now maybe the short technical announcement, which is if there are any questions from our audiences, you can just raise your hand by the option raise my hand. And then Johan, who is sitting behind the scenes, he will unmute you and you will have the opportunity to ask your questions. Irina, our first speaker, she will stay for 45 minutes. So that's why we will start with her. And then if there will be any questions to Irina, I would ask you to ask the questions first to her. And so she has the chance to answer. Exactly, Irina. So as you were mentioned. In the last months leading to elections, the Georgian Dream passed legislation that raised significant concerns. You had new laws in Georgia, including the foreign agent law, the anti-LGBT law, and the widespread anti-Western propaganda. As a response in the society, there were many protests and there was criticism and it was just a quite turbulent time in Georgia. So maybe you could start with a brief overview about the situation, and as you work for ISFED, one of the most important, in my opinion, NGOs in Georgia, you could give us just tell us about how ISFED dealt with the situation, and then we could move to elections. But first, maybe just like an overview of the political situation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for showing your interest on this such an impactful and important event. First, I will start by saying when ISFED was launched and what's our mission, so it will be clear why we are monitoring these elections and what's our views regarding the political situation that we are facing right now. ISFED is a non-governmental, non-profit, independent organization that has been monitoring Georgian elections since 1995, since it's in launching. So we've been monitoring all the Georgian elections and referendums since this time, and not only monitoring and observing, but also contributing to improvement of electoral legislation, as well as conducting voter education campaigns, and fighting against Russian and domestic propaganda and disinformation that is anti-Western, also providing legal aid to those who are politically terminated from public sector. This is why all this situation and political context is quite relevant to our work. And Natalia rightly mentioned the political context that we faced prior to the pre-election environment. We've seen that actually in 2023, there was the first introduction of foreign agents law. It's changed its name in 2024 because the ruling party reintroduced this law, and now at the time it's called Foreign Agents Law, and now it's called on transparency of foreign influence, as if the changing of the name would help the situation. The aim of this law, what they mention, is that the organizations and independent media, those who get funding more than 20%, would have to register as foreign agents. And this law is very similar and mirrors Russian-style law that was introduced in 2012 in Russia. And we've seen really horrible result that it had after its introduction, because our sister organizations, and similar to what we do, the organizations who have been observing elections and being involved in spreading democratic values, have been shut down, and we're not able to continue their operation and cease their operation because of donors were not there anymore, because of their operation was not independent and free, and it was almost impossible to operate in that toxic environment. The first time we've seen in 2023 when this law was introduced, we saw a lot of protests and international criticism against this law. And unfortunately, at the time, they withdrew this law, but they announced that there will be another reintroduction. And we've actually waited for it. It was not unexpected that in 2024 it was reintroduced. Obviously, again, huge protests, big international criticism came from, especially obviously Western partners, that this law was not only anti-democratic, but also obviously anti-European and anti-constitutional as well, because this labeled us as foreign agents, the organizations who are trying to help Georgian democracy, who are trying to contribute to better future. Why we should be labeled as foreign agents, right? So what we've been saying, obviously we protested this law in different means. People went out to streets and we obviously joined them. We tried to be as having close connection with the international community, with the European allies and partners, to spread what threats it might face, that we've seen the same scenario play out in Russia, and what are the risks. We had there was a presidential veto, but they overrode this veto and besides all these developments, presidential veto, protests, international criticism, they still adopted this law, which went in force in August on August 1st. So we had to register. We had just 1 month to register. We obviously did not register just for the simple reason that we are not considering ourselves as foreign agents, and we know what this situation will lead to. So us and also a lot of other independent organizations refused to register. But it is not only a political tool for organizations that are observing elections or are involved in criticizing the ruling party and the government's actions, but also it obviously affects other NGOs, like people like NGOs who are protecting people with disability rights or like animal welfare, so it's quite a broad kind of thing. And they are obviously the major point of this law is obviously to fight against NGOs who are more like politically involved in this situation, but obviously it's also affecting other NGOs that are having quite important actions and contributions to Georgia's welfare and people's welfare. These were prior developments, like before election environment. So we faced a pre-election environment with quite toxic and polarization as well with these laws. And we also saw another law that about anti-LGBT law about family values, and that also is discrediting minority rights. So these were actually the environment which we went throughout this time, and obviously it's not, it hasn't finished yet, and we're still going on through this, but we haven't had any effect in terms of like operational side yet. So we were able to conduct our observation mission, fortunately, but we're not sure where we're at this point in terms of this Russian law.
Yeah, I would like to introduce you very shortly here, Irina, because as you were talking about other NGOs, and we could start going direction election and what had happened actually on E-Day. But before we come to this, ISFED was observing elections, but also there were different organizations observing elections that were building coalitions, and maybe you could introduce shortly this landscape.
Absolutely. So just to make clear what was our methodology. So we started exploring, observing pre-election environment. So what we think, as I said, is to start monitoring pre-election environment from June 1st, which is unofficial pre-election environment, like 5 months prior to the election day, when official pre-election environment campaign starts 2 months before the elections. Well, we thought that this would be relevant. We've been doing this quite a long time for now, but we're thinking that major violations happen way in advance before the election day. So we started on 1st of June, and then we had obviously pre-election environment on August. Obviously, on election day, we had more than around 1,000 short-term observers inside polling stations, 235 outside perimeter monitors, observers, and we had obviously district commission district observers as well as mobile groups. We had a data center where we had monitors there as well as lawyers ready to help observers to file complaints and other incidents to raise issues.
Yes, exactly. So on the one hand, we had ISFED with their mission. Then there was a coalition of My Vote, which was a coalition of 30 independent Georgian NGOs. And there was another coalition observing the election. The name of it was GAILA, and this was the Georgian Young Lawyers Association that was observing. So we could see the movement and in the interested in the population in election observation here. And after the election, all those coalitions, those associations published statements that they don't agree that the result of the elections reflect the will of citizens of Georgia. In all those statements, one could read that there were problems like voter bribery. There was verbal and physical. There were verbal and physical confrontations. The secrecy of votes was often not upheld. There were many of incidents of mass ballot stuffing and multiple voting, and I think it's such a shame also because this election was special. Also, there was like a technical aspect of it. It's supposed to be improved by electronic voting, and this electronic voting supposed to just make it more transparent. But Irina, maybe you can say how was it at the end? How did it work?
You rightly mentioned, Natalia, that we were observing all these organizations and coalitions were observing elections, and they have been also observing, especially Gaila is also one of the oldest and largest NGOs observing elections for quite a long time. And the TIA and My Vote coalition had amazing and important role here as well. So obviously, civil society and domestic observers' role was very important because obviously we know the Georgian context, and we know that I mentioned that violations happen way before the election day, and that's what I want to state here, that when we are speaking about results of these particular elections, we shouldn't just emphasize election day, but we need to look at pre-election violations, election day violations, and assess post-election environment as well. So the combination of these three, when we observe this like 3 periods, let's say the pre-election environment especially, I would say that it was like predetermined what would be result because of its violations. Obviously on election day a lot of violations happened, but pre-election environment violations were quite alarming, concerning, and significant in terms of determining how the election day would look like. Now, when I say that, to be more specific, I want to emphasize that violations revealed during the pre-election period was voter pressure, intimidation, confiscation of identity cards, and this was quite new, collection and processing of personal data, and voter bribery that significantly damaged trust in elections. And on election day, ISFED documented serious violations such as ballot stuffing of ballot papers, multiple voting, unprecedented levels of voter bribery, explosion of observers from polling stations, as well as instances of mobilizing voters outside polling stations. As I said, we had outside polling station observers because in Georgian context, this is such an important thing, because outside polling stations, there were a lot of gatherings, like suspicious gatherings of criminal groups, as well as Georgian Dream Party representatives. So that also obviously represent violations of the election day. Today we saw that Kaila issued statement regarding that all this, you rightly mentioned that on an election technology level, each should have improved the environment, especially in terms of vote secrecy. And because of this very important issue was violated, Kaila issued statement saying that these polling stations, which is more than 2,000, should be annullated because voter secrecy issue was violated, and based on, according to ODIHR, for example, the secrecy of ballot should be absolute at all stages of the election, especially at the time of voting. So obviously, if it's violated, definitely this is something that we should consider.
I think it's also important to say that all the international election observation missions didn't recognize those elections as free and fair. And the only countries that congratulate Georgia on those elections were authoritarian countries like Azerbaijan, like Belarus, and so on. I think there were like Venezuela, or like I think there were like 5 countries in
Many
general.
Azerbaijan, Russian propagandists, for example, as well, like Margarita Simonian was very happy with the results and congratulating. So obviously they were authoritarian, and you rightly also mentioned that, for example, Odir and Helsinki Committee and Joseph Borrell commented quite opposite to this, that it was not free and fair elections and it didn't reflect Georgian people's will.
Exactly, and there are many cases, and all those NGOs are going to court, and we obviously hope for the best in this case. Okay, I will like to ask if there are any questions from our audiences to Irina, as she cannot stay the whole meeting with us. So I will open up shortly before we go to our next speaker and talk about media. Or maybe you could just like start already thinking about your question, and okay, then good. Then Irina is still with us for another like 20-30 minutes. So if you have a question to Irina, just like make sure to ask it earlier than later. Thank you for this.
There is like one question.
Yeah, there's a question. Okay, hello,
Yeah.
hello, Johan from the back. Nadia has a question, please.
Hello, yes, thank you very much also from my side. I'm Nadia Siefert. I'm also a member and working in Berlin in an NGO. And I would, Irina, right? I would like to ask you a question. So my first question would be, is there, maybe you could say something about the difference in the cities and the rural areas where there's significant differences in these elections? Like what were the obstacles there? And my second question would be, yes, how can such a procedure now go on? Like, I see civil society being super active. You will go, I heard now, into court. But what are your measures? What instruments do you have now, like as an NGO working on election observation after elections? Like, what could be a process now? And I assume it can be very, very challenging. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia, for that's a really important issue that you asked about regional and big cities context, because there were quite a big difference. In the big cities, we've seen that the Georgian dream was in terms of voting, like calculation. When we calculated this, when CC calculated this, we saw that in big cities, they were quite different. But in regional context, they won, especially in ethnic minority populated areas. Now, what we see behind this, like the reason behind this, is because people are more vulnerable towards disinformation, and the ruling party had quite intensive disinformation campaign prior to these elections. It was especially, they stressed that they spread this message that this election was like a choice between war and peace, as if like, for example, the pro-European opposition framed this as a referendum between like choosing being internationally isolated and under Russian influence, or being part of the European family. On the other hand, the ruling party said that in case we choose opposition, and in case opposition wins, then we'll get war. There will be this like a global war party kind of conspiracy theory that some Western partners want us to be involved in war and to open this second front, that the first one is in Ukraine and now in Georgia. And we've seen that actually their election campaign was quite resonating this and mirroring these narratives, because there were banners all across the country where we saw on the one side the destroyed buildings, bombed cities, devastation caused by Russia in Ukraine, and on the second side, like prospect, very like colorful buildings and stadiums and streets of Georgia. Obviously, this is something that using such a tragedy for electoral purposes is terrible campaign. But for some people, especially in regions, those who do not have got confused what was really going on and obviously afraid because of our history with Russia, and we had several wars with Russia. Especially they remember the 2008 war, and they are afraid of getting Russia provoked, as the ruling party says. So obviously that was different. Another issue is that there is obviously vulnerability in regions as well in terms of social vulnerability. What I mean here, in 2020, we had research with CRRC when we found that with focus groups that people stated that they are afraid that their social aid would be ceased and terminated. This was because obviously they spread these messages, and they are also vulnerable in terms of like vote bribery and all this vote secrecy issue. We tried our best to raise awareness that vote secrecy is something that is their choice, is something that is guaranteed and that they can vote whenever they want. But obviously because of vote secrecy was violated, now we're trying to defend their rights, because obviously what Gaila said, to annulate this polling stations where electoral election technologies were used and where vote the secrecy was violated. It's an issue that requires more investigation and more evidence. And as for your second question, in terms of like court and our like actions, what are we doing now is focusing on gathering data and evidence and proof that these violations were violated, to have all these instances recorded, submitted to relevant authorities, as well as make international society and community aware of what is going on. So we'll probably see more harsh rhetoric from the West as we provide more evidence on this.
Thank you, Irina. We have two other persons that have some questions. I would say let's collect the questions, and then we will move to our next speakers. Thank you for your patience also. Sorry for the changes in the program a bit. Okay, Christoph.
Thank you. Hello from Vienna. My question is regarding the influence of the West, also in the aftermath of the elections, and if pressure from Western countries is enough to maybe change and have re-elections in at least some constituencies, and especially also how European Union should deal with Georgia, even if there is no change. Georgian Dream will rule, because we saw it after 2020 already that it paved the way for this election. So
yeah, but I believe this is a perfect question to Veronica, actually, as we will about
and she can take it as already as well. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. So I think Veronica will just remember it, and if there are any questions to like Georgian NGO maybe, or to election observation, that would be a question to Irina, I would say. Okay, Emilia.
Hi, also greetings from Tbilisi. I'm also there right now. And I have like also two questions. Maybe the first one, I don't know how stupid it might be, but I like Salome Zurabishvili also said in her speeches that there is a thunder operation of Russia in these elections. And I also read now that there are indications from influences of Russia. And I wanted to ask, like, if it's just about the closeness from Ivanishvili to Russia, or also Georgian Dream to Russia and their politics, or are there also indications about really direct influence of Russia in the elections? And I also have the question because I was in the protests now 2 days ago in front of the parliament and talked to people, and also were asking what is coming now, and everyone is very idealist about what's going on now, because there is like not really much to do also for the people there instead of waiting and in trying to figure out what's happening now. And maybe you can also talk about this. What's the future now? What's going on in the next days? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, but then I guess I would just move to our next speaker, to be honest, as this is the next point of our agenda. Irina, I hope you don't mind.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yes, I guess I will move to Nina, who is a journalist and who would like to give us an overview about the media perspective and the media landscape in these elections. And I would really appreciate if she would just include those aspects of disinformation, Russian disinformation, and misuse of administrative resources from the ruling party. I guess, yeah, exactly. If you could give us an overview, and I guess that would be also an answer to the previous question. Nina, if I could ask you to speak.
Hello, thank you very much for having me, and hello to everyone listening and participating. Yeah, those are very interesting questions, and we are still looking for answers to some of them. And together we are trying to figure out what's going on in our country. So to give you a general overview, and about myself, I'm not a journalist myself. I do photography for media, and also I help them as a local producer and a fixer to do their projects, execute their projects in Georgia. But I work closely with international media, so I'm aware of a few things that's going on here. So generally speaking, freedom of speech and the freedom of media is granted by the Constitution and other supporting acts. But sometimes the reality is a little bit different from what we see on the paper, and our media is facing a lot of challenges that would be different powers trying to influence local media, TV channels, and other media outlets. Of course, it's part of the process of a new democracy, whereas certain certain powers want to gain some influence and use the media outlets for their personal agenda and propaganda. So right now, the most obvious division is between the media channels and media outlets that are influenced by the ruling party, Georgian Dream, etc., and the other part of the media that are influenced by the opposition parties are founded or directed by the representatives of the opposition party. So basically, if you listen to different channels, like one of those, for example, and the other one, you get the feeling that you live in two different countries in two different realities. And just a slight example was that a couple of days ago, I think yesterday, the president of the Polish president gave interview to Polish Radio Z, and he talked about Georgia and the elections, and one of those channels that is Rustavi 2 reported about this, and they said that Georgian President Salome Zurabishvili, according to Andrzej Duda, wasn't able to provide any evidence of Russia's involvement in Georgian elections. And then the opposition channel, the channel that supports the opposition quite strongly, then they made the statement. So basically, they quoted what Andrzej Duda actually said. So I followed the link. I went to the original website. I wanted to fact check, and basically, I could not find anywhere what the Georgian Dream Supporters TV channel said. Nowhere in the text. Of course, I don't really speak Polish, so I could not listen to the whole length of interview, but I don't think that the channel representatives also speak about it. So basically, the narratives that Georgian Dream used, and that was like the TV channels also supported this idea, was that the opposition wants to opposition just is dragging, like Irina said, is dragging Georgia into the war again. And basically, they were trying to manipulate people's sentiments, especially those in living in the villages, in rural areas. I think they were their focus group. And those people who don't have access to alternative resources other than TV and TV channel, and Georgian language resources, and they just manipulate their sentiments, that everybody wants to feel safe, and Russia is our biggest threat. So if we fight for our independence too loudly, then Russia will invade us again. And also they used very, very broadly the sentiments of patriotism and wanted to portray like Europe and opposition parties as someone who would drag us to so we would lose our they want to take our language away, and they want to make us European in the sense that we lose our identity. And there were direct statements made by ruling party leaders as well about that we won't be anybody's vassals, and we want to be part of European Union, but nobody can tell us how we live, how to live, and what to do with our country and with our freedom, etc., etc. So they used. And when it comes to like abusing administrative resources, we know that it happens in every country to different extent. But I would say that nowadays, and a pre-election, they not only used administrative resources because they have way, way more money. They don't even need to abuse administrative resources, right? Because we all know who is behind the ruling party and how much he owns and where he accumulated those finances, right? So it's not so much about, even though that is still an issue, but there was way more going on and way more money was involved in this campaign than just administrative resources. This is what I wanted to point out.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to comment shortly on this and maybe remind of what Irina was also saying. So when I arrived at Tbilisi, it was very obvious for me that there is a huge electoral campaign, Georgian Dreams electoral campaign, because those are the billboards that you can see. Those are the logos all over the city, all over the country, and I guess once in the public landscape, the billboards, but also in the media, they were. I don't have exact percentage in my head, unfortunately, but the screening time, the media time, and was absolutely misused by the Georgian Dream, and there was a very little competition visible in this point. So I just wanted to make it clear. Irina, do you want to add something? I know that ISFED was also monitoring it.
Yeah, you rightly mentioned. No, actually, I think that I covered all these aspects. Just wanted to say that because of this specific webinar is also about youth involvement, just wanted to say how we try to engage youth, because obviously in the context of foreign agents law, they played a huge role. So-called Generation Z was quite active in this context. We tried our best because throughout this time, we thought that there were three major groups that we wanted to work with, and one of them were youth as well as diaspora. And I'm happy to say that we tried our best to engage youth through various aspects with our raising awareness campaign, first-time voters trainings, and they were quite involved and interested in this, and hope that they will not lose hope, and they will fight for a better future of Georgia.
Yes, exactly. So on the one hand, we had the Georgian Dream supporters, and on the other hand, we had the youth who played a very important role. So I need to say there was a huge polarization, and there is a huge polarization in the society, and this was also visible in media. Nina, maybe if you could say something now to this topic of polarization, and or if you had some further comments.
Yeah, I would say I just wanted to say that the whole campaigns, pre-election campaigns from both parties, opposition and position, were not based on what they would do or what they promised. They would not even bother to give us any promises, unlike the previous years. At least they would bother to lie to us. But this time, their main focus was to play with fear and emotions. So in one side, Georgian Dream and the government were trying to scare us that if we don't support them, then this evil opposition will come back and they will do worse than they did before to us, and they will drag us into the war, as I said, etc., etc., and we will lose our nationality and so on. And on the other hand, the opposition parties also did not do enough to reach anybody outside of Tbilisi. I think they didn't make enough efforts to go and really communicate with their electorate outside of Tbilisi. They did not do much campaign in the villages where people really, really struggle. And they both built their campaigns. It was more like against each other. You should choose me because other one is worse than me, and they will, ruin your life or future on the country. So they, especially Georgian Dream, they played very dirty, as Irina said, using those pictures from Ukraine to illustrate what would happen to us if we would not elect them, to say in a very simple way. That was not only very tasteful, I would call it immoral. I think as a general citizen, regular citizen, I have the right to say that. It was, and everybody's reaction around me was similar to this. It was absolutely unacceptable to use Ukrainian pictures. Also, they used a lot of resources, like people who are employed by the government, including teachers, kindergarten teachers, people who work for the government or different establishments who's behind the government, behind whom is the government. Also the way Georgian Dream ruled this like the whole campaign, it was basically not forcing people so much, but brainwashing people in a way that they would vote themselves. So I would say they used very well tried tricks on people. Soviet propaganda, I would say. So a lot of people were voting, some of them under fear, some of them because they didn't want to lose their jobs, but there were quite some people who were voting because they do believe that what they would say, they were afraid of doing otherwise. So I don't know if other Georgians would agree with me or not, but that's my personal impression as well.
I guess this is again the topic of secrecy of vote that Irina already mentioned, and I just wanted to also add that my Georgian colleagues said that these elections felt for them as not elections but like a referendum, that the Georgian for the Georgian dream it was a referendum for peace or war, and for the opposition it was for European Union or Russia. And now I would really like to move to Veronica, as it's already 6:45 and she didn't have the chance to speak yet. And we are starting to talk about European Union. So maybe you have an open floor, but maybe if you could put those elections in a bigger international context, I think that would be very grateful. And I know that you also research on youth, so if you try to connect those topics somehow, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Very,
Natalia.
Sophie. Can I jump in and just say thank you all for organizing this event and express my gratitude to the audience for attending and contributing such thoughtful questions. I have to leave, and thank you all so much for your contributions. It was such a thought-provoking event. Thanks a lot, and wishing you productive discussions.
Thanks, Irina.
Bye-bye.
Okay, great. Yes, thanks to Irina, and so thank you also for the kind of transition, Natalia. It fits very well. I wanted to say a bit more about maybe also the global dynamics of what we are observing, because I think it also should be brought in a bigger context, as you just said. So I think there were many things we observed already before the elections, and Irina already has hinted on them. I think that Georgian Dream issued or joined a fully anti-liberal, anti-Western revolt. That's this is how we could formulate it. This is how also Natalia Sabanadze, a political scientist, has put this. And already in July, during the electoral campaign, Bidzina Ivanishvili announced to put an end to liberal fascism. So he has called it this way when the electoral campaign was launched. And also with regards a bit to also what kind of long-term or like short long-term implication all of this could have. So today we don't know, but we know certain things that have been said before. So it was announced that after the elections there might be grave political consequences, including a ban of opposition parties. This is what was announced in August, and this was referred to as the collective national movement, so which does not only refer to the UNM oppositional party, but to all of those four parties that were elected now. And this was explained also, and I think it's also important to say, because there is a constant kind of going back to 2012 to this transition. And Ivanishvili said, when we ended UNM's bloody regime, I thought my mission was done, but it was not enough. We still have to fight for our independence and sovereignty. So this is also, I think, vocabulary that is very characteristic, and also for the right-wing conservative discourses that we see around independence and sovereignty. And he said, I personally continue that struggle to fully restore our nation's sovereignty. And then, and Irina has said this before, that NGOs and radical opposition were said to be linked to the global war party. I think it's also important that this was portrayed this way. So we would, of course, have to observe, but I think there is a danger, like a real danger, that there will be a further closure of the space for civil society actors, also for social movements and for anti-governmental scholars. And I also want to talk about this a bit later with regards when we will talk about solidarity. And there is really a fear or a danger, and that many might be forced into emigration. And what also is a possibility is that, and we already see this now, that there is little punishment or no punishment for kind of everyday political violence. And this is, of course, also an additional danger and that exists. So having said this, I think there is little reason to be optimistic, but it doesn't mean to give up on all hope, of course. And now with regards to the EU, so I think it has been very well put also by Nino before, like how the whole campaign was, how this was actually not portrayed as an anti-EU campaign, but as a pro-European campaign in some manner. And so also yesterday, the Prime Minister Kobakhidze announced that the membership, the EU membership, would be Georgian Dream's foreign policy priority. So I think it's also important to mention this, and of course, as many probably in the audience, and we know that the first person who visited Georgian Dream and who legitimized also the elections was Viktor Orban. And so now a bit looking more into what else did the EU do so far? So there were cautious statements announcing that there was an uneven playing field, and then it was announced that the EU would look into the final results of the OSCE election report, so they have not yet been released. And then yesterday, I think there was another statement where Joseph Borrell said that the elections were declared as not free and not fair, and then he demanded an independent investigation. And this is also before a question was asked, and what should the EU do? So I think it is important to insist on this investigation. Of course, what we could expect out of this, we also can have very moderate expectations, but at least there should be an insistence on this, I think. And then there were various reactions, I think, within the EU. So I also don't think that the EU portrays itself now, it doesn't have a coherent strategy or something like this. There were some actors that were more assertive than others, that already announced potential steps and plans. And what I also want to add is that today the enlargement report was published. And there was also said that, so there's 9 recommendations that the EU gives that Georgia should fulfill to continue the European integration process. And there was no significant progress, of course. And also basically what was said is, so as long as these outstanding concerns and key reforms are not conducted, the EU cannot consider opening the negotiation. So it's also important that in December 2023, Georgia was granted the EU membership status, and then this year these negotiations were frozen. So officially Georgia is still a membership candidate, but the negotiations were frozen, and there, of course, they won't be continued now. And then maybe I will leave out the US. I think we could talk about it later. Just maybe 2 more sentences on the regional implications, and then also a little bit, maybe just an addition on Russia. And Nino already has said a lot about this earlier. And Natalia, you also hinted, so Azerbaijan was actually the second state to congratulate Georgia on the elections. I think so far 8 states have congratulated or endorsed the elections. And then Armenia congratulated Georgia earlier as well, which is interesting why this was done. We could suspect that this is because of Armenia's fragile economic geopolitical situation. So basically, some analysts make the point that if Georgian-Russian relations would improve, that this could have a very detrimental effect on democratization in Armenia. Yeah, and at the same time, of course, this can also, with regards to what will happen with regards to the EU, this also can have repercussions on the situation in Armenia. And then with regards to Russia, maybe just to add, so that there were various statements now, and I think before also someone else asked a question on how direct is this influence, right? So this question is very often posed, and it's very difficult to answer this. However, what we see is at least an alignment of rhetoric. So for instance, Maria Zakharova, who is the Speaker of Foreign Affairs, she said that the West applied a form of neocolonialism by questioning the results and by giving what she said would be ultimatums. And she said it would be important that no third country would interfere. At the same time, some of Russian officials said that Zurabishvili should be arrested. So it's giving this recommendation at the same time, though, making actually interference themselves. And this is, of course, not everything. So also what is interesting, what was done, maybe, I think it's maybe not so much known that there is a visa-free regime, and this was expanded for Georgian citizens before the elections. So this is also where we can see that there is attempts to, I think, to strengthen the economic ties that exists, even if there is no official diplomatic relations between the 2 states. Yes, I think these were the main things with regards to global showing the relations. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Before we go further, you mentioned visiting Orban lately in Georgia, and it was during the protest. And Nina, maybe do you know how Orban was welcomed by the Georgian citizens. Maybe you would like to tell something about that.
With whistles and boos and screaming, of course. Georgian citizens, because the hotel where he was staying is literally where the protest was going on. So you can imagine how these protesters would greet him. So he got not a very Georgian welcome, but I guess rightfully so.
Yeah, so we could observe on the one hand, the streets were full of Hungarian flags, and there was this protest just a day after elections where people were gathering, and Orban arrived in this very moment of the protest, and he was whistled and screamed at, and so on. Sorry, I just wanted to comment on this, Veronica. But thank you so much for putting our discussion into the bigger global context. As we are of the youth chapter, I would like to hear from both of you, from Nina and from Veronica, once again, what is about the Gen Z and what is about the youth movement in this election, and what have they done and how do they feel now? Yes.
I can start a little bit and then I will give over to Nina. Okay. Yes, I think so. We don't have the numbers, for instance, like what was their preferences, like with regards to voting other parties. But of course, there were a lot of young new voters, so that voted for the first time. And we know this with regards to the other protests that were early, that were this year, that were last year, that young people have been very vocal with regards to the protests and being against the foreign agent law and being also against the government. And there is also empirical data that proves that. We also know from empirical data, I think that's like surveys that CRC conducted, that and they among them like 65 or 70% or probably even more. So they're very, very pro EU. At the same time, I think currently that's at least the impression I also get from like talking with younger colleagues, there is a high form of demoralization now. So there is a very high form of disappointment and fear, and like obviously a very high feeling of injustice. And there is talks about leaving the country as well. But at the same time, I would say, we cannot know what is the how the protests and what is happening now will unfold. And there is definitely a very large potential for mobilization among young people, and they have also shown this during the last day. So there were, of course, yesterday was a very small protest, but this was also organized by a youth group. I think that's the things that I wanted to say. Nina, is there something you would like to add?
Yeah, I think you covered most of it. Thank you so much. So there is not much to add to it, but the thing is that there is a disappointment, but also we were not expecting anything else, unfortunately. So together with the disappointment, which comes with facing the reality, there was also expectation, given the reality that we live, that we did not expect fair elections in Georgia, right? So together with the disappointment, I think the young youth of Georgia are collecting themselves and watching what the president will say, and probably we are all watching, especially the organizers of the protests, etc. We are watching what the political leaders will say. So they are organized, and we and together as a society we make steps that will take us to the result, rather than emotional. The protest that's based on pure sentiments and emotions. And I think the statements that the president also made on the meeting, the first protest, is that that we are waiting for the results, and collecting the evidence that will prove of violation of that took place during the elections. And all this data will be collected and sent to the international organizations. So I would say now everybody that they choose to how you choose to fight more legally on an international level, and maybe call new elections. That's their statement. So anything that in the next steps that will take place will be more rational rather than emotional, which is always good.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nina. As we are talking about the domestic, about the citizens of Georgia, about the young people there, I would like to ask you, Veronica, what can we internationals, how can we react, how can we support Georgia in this moment, and how can the international institutions support Georgia? What can be done?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think it's a very important question, and yeah, thank you for raising it. And when I heard we would talk about this, I also actually talked with some of like Georgian colleagues, more in, of course, in the academic field, because that's where I work. So I also want to say a bit what they said to me. So one colleague said, I believe that the most impactful support right now is to keep Georgia in the public eye and ensure it remains a part of the public discourse. So with regards, to what we're doing also in Germany now, so to have more discussions also in German maybe, so that's one thing. And then he's saying the more academic and public discussions we can generate, the better. We need not to abandon Georgia. And then also he said ways to support civil society, academia, especially the younger generation, which have made significant progress in recent years, and to create new programs, exchange, joint activities, initiatives, and that the youth must not be abandoned, and to amplify the voices of Georgian colleagues in all those things. And yeah, so I think that's one thing. And then one other thing that I wanted to add is, I think also with regards to the universities, I think there has been a lot of pressure on some of the universities. So for instance, Ilia State University, which is the second largest university in Georgia, in Tbilisi, which is also a university where I studied, and I really experienced like a very critical intellectual community. And this university has only received or has not received full accreditation. So I think it's also very important to support colleagues there, and to be very alert what is happening in these other institutions that might not always so much be the focus of the debates. And yeah, not to make the debate about geopolitics, but to really look at what is happening like in everyday life, and what kind of political shifts are there that directly affect people. Yeah, but I think, yeah.
Yes, thanks. And I would also, of course, say the same, but I think it's important to repeat that those elections weren't free and fair, and they really are not this is not what Georgian people are thinking. And the ruling party really tried to using different methods to achieve their goal. And as I was saying at the beginning, none of the election observation missions see those elections as so, and none of the democratic states said that they accept the results of those elections. Yes, good. Then I would say, any questions from our audiences? I hope that during our discussion we answered the questions that were asked previously. But if you have any other questions, there is a chance to ask them now. While we are waiting, maybe Nadia, no waiting. Sorry. Please ask your question.
No, thank you. I hope I'm not interrupting anyone. Yes, thank you so much. It's been very, very interesting. And as we are talking about solidarity, I wanted to raise an issue maybe that is less a question than a comment. I'm sorry that it is not formulated as a question, but I'm just, or maybe you can comment on it from your side. I mean, it's not about academia, it's about the work of NGOs and people politically active in Georgia. And I just wanted to mention that as an NGO working in Berlin, having projects with Georgia, we already are hearing the first requests from civil society actors and especially queer people. So we had the first requests of people who want to leave the country. So I just wanted to raise this issue about solidarity, that probably what we will see is some sort of closing, which is already happening, of NGOs, right? Any NGOs that should have been registered. And as far as I know, most NGOs did not register under the new law. And we already see some consequences of this, and we will expect more. And although I'm aware that there have been some new funding programs, that will be definitely a challenge for the next year. And it practically means that we expect more sort of emergency calls from colleagues from Georgia who want to leave the country, especially queer community, but also others. We expect not to be able maybe to hold events in Georgia. We cannot foresee this now. We're also considering security things, especially working online. So we have another security concerns already, and just wanted to mention here, and if anyone here also in this call is has some means to think about how to support practically a Georgian civil society quite fast, I would love to stay in contact and just raise this issue if you have a chance there, to connect and to find ways also to support people practically. I would be very happy. Thank you.
Nina, would you like to comment on this somehow? But don't feel pressured. And we can also move to other question. Okay, good. Then let's... Ricardo, you wanted... I see you raising your hand. Please,
Yes.
free to ask your...
Thank you so much first for organizing this panel. It was indeed very insightful. And me, myself, I'm living in Armenia. I just have more an outside view also on Georgia. But what I've noticed in the last years specifically was that, for example, there were reports about Azerbaijani activists who disappeared or journalists who were arrested in Tbilisi, for example, and then extradited to Azerbaijan. Recently, there was even like an Armenian journalist who was not allowed entrance to Georgia. From your perspective, how deep is the grip of the current of Georgian Dream into the administration, like the general administration of Georgia, and how difficult will it be generally to, let's say, if theoretically opposition movement would come to power, how difficult it will be for a new government actually to replace these people who are probably very loyal to Georgian Dream after such a change in power?
I guess Veronica, maybe? Could you try?
I will be happy to start, and then maybe we can go together with Nina. So I think it's two very important questions. I think with regards to how deep does this get, so what is often mentioned with regards to analyzing Georgia is the term of state capture. So we can say that all the major institutions are captured by the states, and this is also true for the judiciary, for instance, and for the investigatory, prosecutory, and also security entities in the country. So I do think we have an authoritarian condition, and with really resource accumulation and extra activist policies among the party. With regards and also what you said earlier about these reports that people could not enter the country, or that there is also these concerns with regards to Azerbaijani activists. I think it's definitely very important, and I do think there is also now increased threat for those people that actually left Azerbaijan and tried to find like a more free environment in Georgia, I think, and that might really not be the case in the future anymore. And with regards to the opposition, I think I'd give over to Nina for that.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's been the case. And in addition to those two cases that you mentioned, like recently, Czech journalist was detained at the airport and returned, like deported back to his country, and also another journalist, I don't know, is a Westerner, flying from Dubai, was also not allowed in Georgia. So it's something that also international society should take into an account, because not allowing international observers and journalists into the country is beginning of a great fall for Georgia's democracy. So it's very hard to predict in what steps will the government take, or the opposition, or how things will develop, at least for me personally. But I think there is still hope. And together with the opposition, probably if a new political power will emerge, maybe from a new generation that has not been on the political scene for decades, and have not discredited themselves, like a fresh power, probably that's gonna be giving us a lot more hope, rather than going on this carousel and parties and figures changing their names and resurrect themselves from this political grave and ashes.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much for answering the question. And I will also say that we should definitely stay interested, stay with you, and we will definitely be doing it. And the Junge NGO, we will also try to do whatever we can to put you in the spotlight. There is a last opportunity for a question from the audiences now. 1, 2, 3. And if not, then I would like to thank our panelists and everyone who was here in this meeting. I think it's super important, and we should do whatever we can to give our support. So thank you for being with us here today, and yeah, we wish all the best to our Georgian friends, and yeah, thank you for being here. Bye.
Thank you a lot as well.
Good.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.